Welcome to the Digital Runway. It's where beauty, fashion, tech, and AI collide with culture and commerce. My name is Janey Park. I'm the founder of a future-focused media brand and network that includes 5 live shows as well as a newsletter. And I am very excited here today. Stefano, or Dr. Stefano Puntoni, is literally bringing Ivy League insights to our digital stage. And Dr. Stefano Puntoni is a professor of marketing and co-director of Wharton Human AI Research at one of the top institutions, exploring how AI intersects with business, society, and identity. And we're going to be breaking down AI as well, how AI is taught in Wharton. There's also an AI major, which is revolutionary and groundbreaking to even think that that is something that's being offered. And it's the first one at an M7 institution, as Dr. Puntoni had shared. So yes, without further ado, welcome. And anyone in the live audience, please feel free to drop your questions or to tag and share to anyone who you think would find this conversation interesting. So, Dr. Puntoni, I have the pleasure of being on the other side of a professor. So, number one, I don't mean to be an internet troll, but I decided to wear a Carnegie Mellon sweatshirt, which we were laughing about. I did go there. I did not get into University of Pennsylvania or Wharton, but I love what UPenn and Wharton and also the insights that you're bringing to the table. And I think what is going to be interesting is this one segment that we're going to get into called Digital Decoded. And we get to learn from you today. And just to start off as a quick warm up, I wanted to throw out a few AI terms for you to teach and also decode for us. So the first one, generative AI. How would you explain it and teach this in your courses?
So, Jenny, first thing, CMU is an amazing institution, especially especially in the domain of AI. I think they've been doing amazing work, actually. But yeah, so with regard to defining generative AI, the way you think about it is basically just is a neural network. And a neural network is a prediction machine, so it's making predictions. And a generative AI system is making predictions about a specific thing, which is basically media. And so it spits out, for example, text tokens, and then it produces text language. And so that's basically the way of thinking about AI. This is a set of specialized neural network algorithms designed to produce media. That could be an image, it could be text, it could be a video. But basically, it's still a prediction machine, just like an AI system that you might have seen before in use, for example, for recommended systems or some other techniques. It's just engineered very differently, but the logic is similar.
I already feel smarter with this definition. I'm just kidding. How about AI personalization? How do you explain that, decode that for your students and what that looks like?
Yeah, so that's actually very simple. It's basically personalization via AI. So it's kind of self-explanatory. Essentially, what it does is that AI is such a flexible technology, is able to take a lot of information a company may have about a customer and personalize, tailor content to them. That might be an interaction. For example, it could be a personalized email that is not just saying, "Dear customer," but is actually leveraging the history of interaction with a customer to create something bespoke. But differently from what you might do as a manager, an AI system can do that at scale. And so, I might be able to do that real time for thousands of people.
Okay, there's so many terms I think that you just broke down in a very clear format that I think is very easy to understand for different people. But we're only doing three today just because we don't have time for a full-on lecture. But the last one I would like to cover is algorithmic bias, or just bias in the algorithm, what that looks like.
Yeah, the way we typically define algorithmic bias is basically the presence of systematic discriminatory treatment of an AI system of a certain group of individuals. And typically what you worry most about is discrimination along protected traits. That might be gender, race, categories like that, but there might be many. But basically it would be the idea that the AI system is treating that class of individual in a systematically worse way. That would be the definition.
Okay, and is there a specific AI term or buzzword that you wish people actually understood, or maybe defined a little bit better, that you wanted to take, your hand at actually defining for people because it's so misinterpreted or misused?
Honestly, there's probably quite a list in that. I think AI is a domain where there is a lot of, I think, confusion and maybe many buzzwords that are used sometimes. To me, maybe the thing that will be most useful for most people to have maybe a better understanding of is the transformer model that is powering the language models that we're all using, the ChatGPTs and the Claude and all of those. And the idea there is that these are models that are basically producing text by making a prediction one text token at a time, where a token is a word or a word part, by drawing from incredibly long and complicated probability distributions, which are computed based on the prompt and what comes before. And so based on the algorithm's ability to understand the basically structural relationships in language, given a prompt, they're able to predict the probability that this is the next word in the sentence, and it spits it out. And so it becomes basically like a train that goes one word at a time. And so I think it is important to think about this, because oftentimes we don't quite realize the way that the system works. And when we don't do that, we actually make maybe incorrect assumptions about what it can and cannot do well. Maybe we can work through some of the implications in our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack on all that. It was a mini lesson that we had, but just to kind of keep things moving, I do want to get into, your AI predictions and your thought about it in terms of the way that AI is reshaping pretty much every facet of our life. One of the big pieces of news that came out, and I do want to get to Studio Ghibli right after this, but in terms of virtual influencers or even digital twins, H&M, announced that they were working with 30 different models who had their digital twin. They were giving, the licensing and the rights in terms of name, image, and likeness. What are your thoughts on these whole things of virtual influencers, but also owning or having a digital twin and what that landscape actually looks like now and perhaps in the future?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting spaces right now, I would say, with regard to Gen AI. And you can think about this notion of virtual influencers as being basically a synthetic persona. Basically, it's a non-real person that you form using Gen AI tools. And then you have instead a digital twin, which is something quite different. It's not basically a synthetic persona, but it's a model of a real person, someone who exists in the real world. And you have that in visual. You were pointing out to virtual influencers, for example, on Instagram, or maybe fashion companies using digital twins of real models to have more flexibility as to how to display items of clothes that they want to put in their assortment, for example, for their e-commerce platform. That could be a good use of it. But you can think of it also in terms of language models. So you could also imagine this distinction between a synthetic persona and the digital twin also applying to the context of market research, for example. That same comparison can occur in different applications of Gen AI. In fact, just a few days ago, we published a paper in Harvard Business Review looking at the use of generative AI to support insight generation and marketing research. And there we make the same distinction, but not in the context of visuals and fashion, but in the context of data analytics and insights. So I think that distinction is an interesting one where you can see it playing out in different spaces.
I mean, what's your educated thought or, just prediction in terms of what this looks like? I mean, people use 2050 as this anchor to say different things, and it's very viral on social media, like, oh, this country or this thing is living in 2050. By 2050, do you think that digital twins, virtual influencers will be a lot more predominant than they are today? I don't know if you can speak on that, but I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think 2050 is way beyond the range of predictions. I think, I basically always say that I don't make predictions beyond 24 months because I think things are going so crazy. Even 5 years from now, we will have artificial general intelligence by, 2028 or something. So who knows? But I think in the foreseeable future, if you're looking at maybe the next year or two, I think what we're going to see is interesting conversations around IP and copyright. And so I think there's a lot of to be ironed out, maybe either in legislation or more likely the courts, to be honest, on what is a right to a digital twin and how that works out. There have been already some early discussions around Hollywood actors, that someone was deceased and you want to bring back alive in order to have a sequel or something like that. And in the case of fashion, it's quite an interesting one because if you are a top model, obviously your looks and your body is the brand to some extent. And so when you are going to create a digital twin, then the question is how should that IP essentially now be exploited, by whom and how? And so I think we'll see interesting contracts being drafted in that regard. The avatar type of thing, the virtual influencer is quite different, because obviously a company that creates that virtual influencer will own the copyright over it. And then the question becomes, what is going to be the market reactions to these actors? And we are seeing quite a lot of interest. Now, early on, I think some of the most striking cases that people were talking about were partly just a function of novelty. There was new, and so people found it fun to see. When the world is flooded by those, virtual influences, what is going to be the marginal value adding another one? Probably quite low. And perhaps we might even see a return to an emphasis more on real lived experiences and real people, because people maybe will appreciate more the authenticity of that. We don't know right now, but it certainly is interesting for companies, because the moment that you have the problem always with working with an influencer for a company is that you don't control the behavior of these people. That's the advantage, meaning that the messaging and the promotion becomes more impactful because it's more intimate, it's maybe perceived as more authentic. But at the same time, there could be a lot of backlashes and issues that come with that. While if you have a virtual influencer that you created as an agency or as a fashion firm, then the virtual influencer is not going to do drugs in front of a paparazzi or do whatever, and so you clearly have much more control over that asset. But like I said, some of that success, I think, was mostly a matter of novelty too. I mean, 2 years from now, people are going to shrug and think, okay, another one.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about this because there's a whole nother rabbit hole to go into. But when I think about a digital twin or even an AI agent or even an AI co-host for, the lives and the streams that I'm doing to be, a different character and a different personality to help me to do what I need to do. And I think a lot of times for those, especially within the emerging tech space who are trying to build right now, they are working by themselves as a solopreneur with the AI tech stack and trying to figure out, the best tools and best ways to leverage AI in digital twins or even virtual influencers, or it really just helps us in a way that we wouldn't be able to do all the things on our to-do list or on our plan as a solopreneur.
And by the way, the technology is getting better very fast. For example, how do you know that I'm actually a person and not some kind of digital twin, and I'm actually out fishing and letting my avatar speak to you? I think now it sounds like a crazy thing, but within a year or two, it might often be quite difficult to tell.
I don't know how involved you are in blockchain or authentication, and we didn't actually even cover this, but I'll let you think about it as I kind of set the table here. But I came into the tech space, even though I mentioned earlier I went to Carnegie Mellon. I did information systems. I took one programming class, Hello World, goodbye programming. It was totally not for me. And I ended up studying marketing and doing art as well. And when I look at the way, the industry is currently right now of exactly what you just said, how do you know that I'm real, or even, Stefano or Dr. Puntoni, that you're real? Because there's no verification. But, when we talk about blockchain and authentication, verification on the blockchain that is on a ledger that everyone can see, it makes things very different. But whether or not, again, major companies or even social media platforms are going to be willing or even want to have that kind of information verified on something like a blockchain that's available to everyone. Honestly, to me, when I think about it, sometimes it's a little bit of a toss up unless there's government regulation and they're actually forced into a position where they are required to do it. So I don't know what
Yeah,
you think on
I
this.
don't know. This is really not my area, so it's difficult for me to really comment confidently. But I do think that you are right, that authentication is going to be a major area of activity in the future. More generally, in fact, cybersecurity is going to be huge. I mean, GenAI is an amazing tool, but it's an amazing tool for everybody, including crooks. So now you're emphasizing the issue of authenticity in interaction. How do you know it's me versus a digital twin of me? And that may or may not be a big issue when you're doing a LinkedIn Live or whatever. But if I'm now talking about, handing out bank detail information to someone, then clearly that might become a very big issue. So I think cybersecurity with regard to Gen AI is going to create a huge industry, in fact, I think.
Yeah. And speaking of which, we're talking about AI and blockchain and Web3, but for some reason, I'm not able to stream on LinkedIn right now.
Okay.
So it's just funny. I mean, we talk about like, way into the future, but sometimes we have issues with our normal everyday tech that we're using, and there's issues with that. But what I do want to get into, I think this is a perfect segue to actually discuss about the inclusivity, the ethics of AI and what that looks like and how that discussion or even the research from your perspective, because you're speaking from a point of view as an academic teaching also the next generation of what that looks like. I just want to talk about the inclusivity and the ethics when it
Yeah.
comes to AI.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a big question, right? So first thing you can think about the inclusivity in terms of usage. And I think it's good news, meaning these algorithms have been made available to everybody. Basically, most companies are using a freemium business model, but the free version is very capable. And so basically, you have now about 500 million people across the world having access to ChatGPT, for example. It's a massive number. I mean, that is facilitated by the fact that these companies have almost unlimited access to cash. They're burning through massive amounts of money. There will be pressure for them to monetize that free product. Imagine how much does it cost to serve 500 million, of which only a small fraction are actually paying anything. So certainly in terms of access, I think the picture looks very good. I think basically almost any entrepreneur in sub-Saharan Africa or East Asia, whatever, have access to pretty much as powerful algorithms as anybody in Silicon Valley almost. And so that's actually a bit unique. Typically, you see this huge digital divide. And I don't think we really see it in this case. Although, of course, people with more money might have access to models, a beta version of the models or whatever. And the chat, mostly pro subscription is $200 a month, which is obviously quite a lot of money. But you don't need that to do most things. So that's one element of accessibility, looking at the good picture. Now, on the negative side, the models are, like any AI system, is bound by the data that has been trained on. And the data has been trained on is not necessarily a representative snapshot of humankind across the planet. It's basically mostly trained on internet data, stuff like books and Reddit or X or whatever. And so clearly there is a thin slice of humanity represented in this data. And so there is some evidence that Gen AI models tend to have a bias towards a way of thinking. And typically that way of thinking is the way of thinking of the people who coded the algorithms. So I've seen some working papers showing that if you are correlating the responses of, for example, ChatGPT with the responses of different types of people, the highest correlation that you get, it was basically highly educated, course liberals from the US. And so that may be not surprising, given that these are people providing a lot of the data and coding the algorithms. But it is something to think about when you're making inferences about, the fairness of the correctness of the way that basically representation is emerging. Then you have other issues, which is these models are also encoding anything that people are doing. And because people are biased, those biases are going to be replicated in the algorithms. And so to give you just a concrete example of that, we just published an article where we do an audit of ChatGPT images. Basically, when you try to ask ChatGPT to make an image, you have the text model. Now it's changing with a new model, but basically up to now, you interfaced with a language model, which makes a prompt for DALL-E, the image model, which then produces the image. And what we did was to basically do an audit of the content of those images as a function of the different prompts. In particular, we had a vector of 150 different prompts, which were all about making an image of a person performing a behavior, brushing their teeth, playing a musical instrument or whatever, 150 of these. And then we basically get the picture that we get as a result of the prompt. And then we ask it to make the picture funnier, inspired by kind of like X sort of fad about a year ago. And we get another picture. And then we code those pictures for who is in the picture. And what we find is interesting patterns of bias where when you want to make an image funnier, all of a sudden the image is much more likely to show an overweight person, or is much more likely to show an older person, or is much more likely to show a person with very thick glasses, so a visually impaired person. And so these are evidence of biases. Now, in terms of race and gender, we actually find the opposite. We find slightly lower representation of minorities in the case of the funny image. And we believe that these have been hard-coded by OpenAI to prevent, PR issues. And, we don't know exactly what they've done, but clearly there, the company decided that they needed to take care of the risk of, being exposed as biased towards particular, racial minorities, for example, but they did not take the same precaution when it came to, for example, body mass. And so the argument we make in the paper is that if you care about bias, you should care about bias along all dimensions.
Ooh, okay, that was I'm trying to figure out which direction to go in. I want to hit one topic because that's how I discovered your page and who you are on LinkedIn. And I went deep down the rabbit hole, and that's how, we got connected and I wanted to speak with you. But Studio Ghibli, the ChatGPT dolls that are going viral, what are your thoughts on this? Because I've had people who have watched me share about beauty, fashion, tech, and AI for the last few years finally say, hey, I want to learn how to do this Studio Ghibli, or I want to do a ChatGPT image doll. And then you have the other people who are on the anime lover side saying this is absolutely a disgrace to society. And I know you made some comments on this, but I mean, I'm sure that students are bringing this up possibly in class as well, but what's your take and point of view on this?
If that makes people take an interest in trying out for themselves and maybe it starts creating some AI literacy, that's good. If that fad and interest creates a bit more awareness about, copyright threats and infringement, that's good. But my comment on LinkedIn that you saw was more about the fact that basically there are so many more important conversations to be had about AI right now than that. I think that is basically a gimmick. And so I was just reflecting on the fact that, of all the things that could capture the people's imagination, that is the one that tells you something about people, I'd say.
I just thought it was funny, but I think there was something about making it personal to you. It's almost just the similar thing as going to a fair and getting a caricature of yourself, but you could literally do it with the press of a button with ChatGPT
Right.
image. So I think people just love that aspect of AI personalization or having something. But leading to, I mean, you mentioned in your LinkedIn post, but also just right now, there are other topics in AI that, you're more passionate about or you think that should get more airtime. And I want to get into a little bit about what's going on inside of Wharton, whether or not it's you as a professor, you with an AI, as well as the research you're doing. But for the first question, I want to pinpoint a little bit more about what you're open or you are available to share when it comes to the current research that you're doing related to AI and what you're super passionate about right at this moment.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of research exploring different facets of AI. What I'm most interested in trying to understand the impact on individuals' well-being and how AI might change relationships, identity, and ultimately, impact our well-being. Now, there's a lot of work being done on how do you optimize a chatbot for example, customer satisfaction. So you're a fashion company, you basically get people coming to your e-commerce platform. Now everybody has a chatbot. Okay, how do you design a chatbot to optimize the experience so that people are using the chatbot, getting what they need, hopefully making a purchase, and hopefully liking the brand? Okay, so that's a very active area of research. As a matter of fact, I'll plug it in here. Soon enough, basically in about 10 days, we are going to publish what we call the Wharton blueprint for effective AI chatbot design, where basically it's going to be a booklet of about 60 pages with lots of tips about how to design a chatbot in a particular situation. The point we're making there is that the engineering problem is more or less solved. These models have gotten better very fast. To get a chatbot to behave really quite well in a lot of situations is no longer the big bottleneck. The main problem now is the user experience. And so I think it's becoming, in a way, less of a computer science problem and more of a behavioral science problem. And so in that blueprint, it will be freely available for anyone to download. We're basically reviewing all the new literature that came out in the last 18 months or 2 years or so. Now, that's one thing. But from my own research, I'm interested in thinking, how is society going to change with this? Imagine someone born in 2025. By the time that they are, say, 7, they will start having daily interactions with a variety of different AI buddies and chatbots, maybe digital friends they have on social media apps like Snapchat, or companies providing them with things, or maybe platforms like YouTube providing almost real-time, sort of like almost a personalized TV show. You can have anything you want, and people are going to form relationships with these bots. And what is that going to do to them in terms of happiness, but also in terms of their ability to form meaningful relationships with real people out there in the wild world? Is it going to make it easier for them because now they're very sociable? Certainly, the COVID generation is not very sociable. They actually, I think, lack a lot of experience in social interaction. It's going to affect them probably for forever in some ways. But these new other people might have the opposite thing. They might be ultra socialized. Or maybe could it be that you observe a lot of substitution? Why go out there, put myself out there trying to make a real friend and be judged potentially by someone when I have this AI buddy that always think greatly of me, always want me to be happy, they're always available, they're never tired, they're never grumpy, they're never bitchy or whatever. And so we don't know. And I think it's going to be, I think, exciting to study this space. We're doing quite a bit of work also on mental health and just some of the ideas out there. But happy to explore more stuff if you want any more detail. I'm always excited about to talk about the research.
I think we might have to do multiple rounds, but one thing that I did want to talk about, I mean, I love that you took us on this journey of hypothetical, baby or child who was born in 2025 and born in an era where AI is literally taking off. Data privacy, though, this is something that I think about because even when I'm, searching something on TikTok or I have a phone call with a friend or text, I might be talking about, like, for example, I'm just making this up, but we're talking about like Chinese luxury manufacturing and that whole trend right now that's blowing up on social media of outing the luxury market, that a lot of things are made in China, and then literally having Chinese OEM suppliers, bombarded in, everywhere you go on the internet. Again, that's just a hypothetical example. But, as you're telling an AI or your imaginary friend who is actually an AI being, or maybe it then becomes a physical robot that can actually, be with us, it, to your point, it feels very concerning because, again, how do you then learn how to interact with real people? Because, the AI, maybe it's hard coded or it's wired, so it would never, bully you or be mean or give you any tough love. It would just agree and encourage you in a certain way. But, what are some of the, I guess, physical robots related to AI or even products that you think we possibly could see? I mean, I know you said you don't want to look past 24 months, but even going back to this example of this child who was born in 2025, what could that look like in your perspective?
My sense is actually embodied AI, basically a robot that will be walking around the home. And you will see robots increasingly being used in service delivery, and certainly things like self-driving cars are going to grow more common with time. So we're going to see some of it. But I would say that most of our interactions with AI will be basically mediated through digital services, will be in the internet, on the web more than anything. So it will be in your phone, your apps talking to you, or on websites. I think basically people tend to revert to this image as a robot because it's so prominent in sci-fi, and in a way we tend to assume that we're almost like a Star Wars like devices coming up soon. I don't really expect that to be the case, at least for now. And privacy could be an issue. We already talked about cybersecurity. That's an element of it, right? So if you can get an AI impersonating your mother and very convincingly and get it to spill all kinds of secrets, that could be used against you in identity theft or anything like that. In terms of the social media you were pointing out, I mean, there's a lot going on. It's not necessarily generative AI, or maybe not even AI. It's just the fact that people are increasingly living their life in cyberspace, and everything we do in cyberspace leaves a trace. And so, in that sense, privacy in online environments is to some extent a myth, you would say. And hopefully, you can trust companies to keep your data and store your data, but we have seen a lot of research arguing for a privacy paradox, where people tell you that the privacy is valuable to them, but then you look at their behavior and they behave like it is not, right? And so giving away all kind of personal data just to do some kind of stupid, Facebook little games or anything like that. And so we'll have to see a bit. I hope that we'll see more literacy in that space, so people increasingly understand. I do believe that the younger people are getting savvier on this, and maybe they were 10 years ago. But I think it's also a role of education institutions like colleges and schools to help people understand what makes sense. So, for example, we get these emails sometimes which look like they're coming from a Wharton address, but they basically say something weird about them. And then twice has happened that I sent an email back to my IT people, and they told me, yeah, this was an attempt to fool you and see if you were falling for it, and so you passed the test. So okay, they are taking proactive steps to help people, gain a little bit of sensitivity to, phishing emails in this case.
Yeah, I mean, data privacy, cybersecurity, blockchain authentication, but also just something very general. My parents are in their 70s, so jokingly, but actually in seriousness, I will tell them, at some point we're going to need in real life password. Do you know what I mean? That we need to change repeatedly because again, anyone who has any digital footprint, with deep fakes or anything that is AI generated, your face, your voice, whatever it could be, you need some sort of verification that who you're listening to is actually the real person, kind of what we were saying earlier. So
yeah, here's a tip for everybody listening. You should agree with your parents of a code word that if you are calling them to ask for money,
yes,
you're always going to mention the code word, so that the parents will never send any money to anyone unless a code was spread. I think that is a very easy thing to do, and will probably would make everybody quite a bit safer.
Yes, I think I watched too many conspiracy theory documentaries and movies, but it's a very real scenario, especially with AI and what is happening, because this is only just the beginning of what is happening right now. But I do want to switch gears a little bit to get into, Stefano, like what courses you're teaching and how they've evolved over AI, because obviously you taught at different institutions in the US as well as Europe, but kind of what has been the trajectory of, teaching marketing and also your involvement with AI?
Yeah, currently I teach a course called AI in Our Lives, which is basically a course tailored around my research. So it's a behavioral science course, trying to understand the experience of AI from a user point of view, trying to understand the complementarities between human and artificial intelligence, and trying then to ladder up from the individual to organization to society to try to sketch some of the impact we're likely to see with AI moving forward. A lot of the emphasis is on generative AI, but not only. And so that is something I teach for both undergraduates and MBAs. Now, at the Wharton School, we are very excited that just about a week ago, we announced, like you mentioned, a new AI major or concentration for undergraduate and MBAs. We call it concentration for undergraduates and major for MBAs. But it's the same thing, which is basically a specialization within our core business curriculum in the topic of AI for business. And so there's going to be some technical courses. We do require students taking that specialization to have foundations in machine learning so that they understand basically the rudiments, at least, of neural networks and how to code them and how they work. But then a lot of the courses will be impact focused. One mandatory credit is going to be on AI ethics, so we require everybody to take that. And I'm curious to see how many students decide to do that, and how they complement that with other minors or majors that they might want to take. It's exciting to see. But I think we are one of the first schools, at least a business school. In engineering schools, they've had that already for a while. And of course, they focus on the technical stuff. And we do a little bit of that, but we don't expect our students to become computer scientists. Otherwise, they should be studying elsewhere. But we do expect them to understand the technology well enough to be kind of like intelligent users and help with understanding what's the business potential of this technology.
That's super interesting. I mean, I would love to even go back to school to learn, the AI major. I mean, everything just changes. My running conversation or catchphrase is a New York minute is an Asian second, is a tech and AI nanosecond, because literally there is a new AI tool popping up, getting funding, getting acquired, and new ones popping up literally every day. And it's absolutely insane. So as you build a curriculum like that, how does Wharton and how do the professors keep up with everything that's going on to make sure that your students are aware of the latest tools, what's happening in AI? And I guess where do you kind of draw the line of, this is enough for this point in time, and you can continue to do research in terms of news, but what's actually baked into the curriculum and how much is actually updated as AI continues to change at a rapid pace?
So I find it super exciting to teach in this space, but there is an obvious drawback, which is every year you have to renew your materials a lot. Now, the good news is that some of the fundamentals don't seem to be changing as fast as basically, the individual models are. But I think you're right that basically requires refreshing and rethinking the content. Basically, every year I add a session. Every year I change the content, I change the assignments as a function also the capabilities of this technology. What I do in the class, what we do is every Monday morning, I spend 20 minutes. There is a section in my course called AI News. And what have you read that happened last week in AI? And then we have a conversation about what it means. So I try to draw links between a certain concept in the course and some evolution. For example, you see a company releasing a particular type of model with certain capabilities, and you say that makes sense given their incentive because X and Y and Z and blah, blah, blah. Try to make sense of it. And we do that for the whole semester, and hopefully that helps almost like build a muscle where the students are looking at this AI news, which is relentless and a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. But they are building the muscle to start looking at it critically and say, what's the big picture? Now, it's also important to let go of the idea that you're going to know everything. And I have become very zen about this, meaning that I know the stuff has happened while we're talking in the last 40 minutes or so, and that and I can't have anxiety over that, otherwise I'll stop sleeping. And so you just have to do your best and just be interested in the topic. And if you're intrinsically interested, you know what you need to know, basically. But that's my take.
That is very comforting, I think, for all of us, because you're teaching AI, you're a professor, and you're saying, there's just so much information. I think we all feel anxiety. It just reminds me of pop culture Doshi with their song Anxiety. It's literally the perfect moment, and it really represents the cycle of what's actually happening in tech and AI. But what I did also want to tap into in terms of what you were saying was, how are your students engaging with AI? Like, are they already coming in with knowledge? Are they already equipped? Is it something that, the professors or, at Wharton, you're telling the students, hey, these are tools that you could use. This is a tech stack. Is there resistance? I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but I just would love a litmus test or a temperature check on, what's the overall sentiment from your students.
We are seeing enormous adoption by students. In fact, I've been teaching AI. My first course on AI was in 2021. And at that time, people were interested, and mostly we were talking a little bit about generative AI. It was before ChatGPT. It wasn't really on people's horizons, and even people had very rudimentary understanding with much curiosity in a way. But the first year I taught here at Wharton 3 years ago, and I think a small minority of students were really having done much before. Some of them did, but many of them hadn't, and that has changed. So this year, I asked our undergraduate students, for example, about 75% they were subscribing to ChatGPT Plus, the paid subscription that give you access to the custom GPT programming environment, to Canvas, and a lot of other useful stuff, plus the latest models. And so it's really worth the money. But the first year I was teaching, I basically started by asking them, who has a Netflix subscription? Everybody hands up. Who has a Spotify subscription? Everybody hands up. And then I ask them, who has a ChatGPT Plus subscription? Nobody's hand up. And I say, you need to get your priorities right, because I think actually this is in a way more fundamental to your future. And so, but that has changed. So now basically the large majority of them have it. And by the way, I should say that we were the first business school to have a partnership with OpenAI already for a year. All our MBAs have had access to basically the enterprise version of ChatGPT Plus as part of their basic IT infrastructure. So they all have it, and they may have also their own private accounts for Claude and Gemini or whatever. But we give them an environment that is safe. The data don't leak out, so they can use it for CVs, interview preparation is all like privacy sort of safer. And then we don't do that for the undergraduates, because undergraduates are really pen-wide. It's not just Wharton, and the other schools haven't moved as fast as we have in this space. So right now in my course, I buy the licenses for the undergraduate students, but we'll see in the future how it moves. But it's becoming part, you can't wish it away. Many professors are wishing it away because clearly it's making many assignments and tests very hard to keep, because basically now, enforcement, nobody knows really if you're using it or not. If you are a half decent user, it's not detectable. And so then what does that mean for things like, essays? And on the other hand, I mean, this is becoming quickly a crucial skill for any kind of professional. So I think that our students, who I can see them, they're already using it intensely for all kinds of things every day. By the time they hit the job market, they're going to be power users, and they're going to blow everybody out of the water when they join an organization. I think older people are going to can't believe their eyes. I'm sure they say, "Wow, we do so much." So there's a lot of excitement also for young people to be able to steal a march on everybody else by being the ones who are most proficient. But it's important that they get training, just like for social media, where spending 5 hours on Instagram a day doesn't make you a social media marketeer. It just makes you an addicted user. The same goes for ChatGPT. Just the fact that spending a lot of time doesn't necessarily make you a very good user. So I think it takes some training, it takes some thinking and trying different prompt engineering skills that you can build, trying different products for different purposes and see what works for you, integrating it in your workflow, finding ways in which it works, it doesn't work, when to rely on it, when to not rely on it. Students make mistakes. So I've had some students handing in assignments with hallucinated citations, for example. That happens. So I think it's just a matter of learning. And so I hope everybody is doing that, but I think young people are probably, we see that in our data too, that young people are faster adopters.
So from this, I mean, two questions, but I'll start with the first one, which is cheating. I mean, you must get this question a lot. Like, how do you even decipher? I mean, hallucinations, or if they don't actually fact check, or there are certain things that ChatGPT does, like this, like kind of hyphen, or different things like that, which I even use on a normal basis. But how do you decipher if a student is actually, quote unquote, cheating or using or leveraging AI, and what's considered acceptable and what's considered unacceptable in terms of the way that you look and you grade things?
Yeah, I should say that actually my writing is reminiscing a lot of ChatGPT. I don't know what that says about me, but I also use a lot of things that sound like ChatGPT. But anyway, in terms of it's teacher, here at least, we don't have school-wide policies to recognize the fact that the pedagogy can be very different, topics are very different. If you teach creative writing or finance, clearly, you may have different concerns with regard to students using AI. And so what we do is that we let the teachers make their own policy and enforce it. And in my own specific course, AI is not simply allowed or just allowed, it's in fact mandatory. And so to make an example, I have an assignment where they need to write 4 little essays to apply a framework to a business problem of the choice. And I used to have that, and then I tried it with ChatGPT. It did a half-decent job, and then I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to drop the assignment. And then I thought, oh, maybe actually it's an opportunity. And so what I've done, I turned that into a prompt engineering assignment, where the assignment now has to be written by ChatGPT, and their job is to prompt it to get the best possible output. They have to judge when it's good or not, so they still have to read the article to make sense of the framework. But basically, the idea will be that now, their main thing is not writing, but is instructing, directing the AI system to produce a good output, and then I grade the essay. And so they get graded on their prompt engineering. There is also a self-reflection essay part where they look back at what they did and try to reflect on the strategies that they tried and didn't work so well, what works best, and maybe learn from that. And the feedback I get is that they're learning a ton by doing that. That's actually an opportunity to systematically experiment with different prompts to compare the output on a task that is quite difficult. And when judging quality takes thinking, then I think that is actually something we don't normally do on our daily life. We don't have the opportunity to do it. So being forced to do it is actually quite valuable beyond the fact that I need to assess what they know. And so I think there are many things you can do like that. Another assignment I have is a peer-graded assignment where students submit a custom GPT. Basically, they create a little chatbot to solve a problem of the choice. That chatbot gets randomly assigned to other students, and then they don't know it's anonymous, and basically they rate the usefulness of the chatbots, and then your grade is the average of the grades that you got. And so it's an opportunity for you to try to solve a problem using AI, which is many students maybe didn't really try. And so now they also tell me, oh, wow, this was easy to do. It was a cool thing. I think I'll do it for other things. And at the same time, by grading others, you see what other problems one might tackle. using AI. So these, I think, are innovation. We never could have done this 2 years ago, before the wide accessibility to the custom GPT environment. But now it is possible. So I think all of a sudden you have new opportunities.
This sounds so interesting. I think many of us would love to join your class or be studying as an AI major. But to that, like, what are some educational resources or places? Or, I mean, I know that you may have material as well that you created, or maybe that is coming down the pipeline, but what are some top resources to learn and keep ahead with AI that you would recommend for those who are not able to attend your class or the AI major?
I would recommend following the activities of the Wharton Human AI Research Center and the Wharton AI Analytics Initiative more broadly. We also have a lot of stuff for students. And all the content is free. We produce lots of articles through our portal Knowledge at Wharton. We have webinars, we have podcasts, we have reports that we published. We have one in the fall, is a Gen AI adoption report. You can get the 2024 version for free. We have this one I already mentioned, this blueprint for chatbot design coming up in 10 days or so. So we do quite a lot, and all of it is freely available. So there are, and we're not the only ones. So for example, the Human-Centered AI Center at Stanford, the AI Center is amazing. They just released 10 days ago a very, very long report with lots of really interesting data. So academic institutions are a good source. I think Anthropic is putting out a lot of really interesting stuff on their blog. So I think that's, and other startups and companies like also OpenAI, I think are interesting to follow. They do release quite a lot of useful information. And otherwise, I would say the usual media platforms. They have a business review if you're more the business type, or Wired or TechCrunch or whatever. Or I find very useful to be on LinkedIn, and I am learning a ton about business applications, about new research findings. I especially recommend following my colleague Ethan Mollick, who's probably the most interesting person, experimenting and testing these models and letting you know basically what works. These are just a few, but there are many. The problem is not where to find information. The problem is, how do I make sense of so much information? So
it's literally drinking from a fire hose. Exactly. And those are some great resources. I'm definitely going to, dig into Wharton and to see, what information is readily and also freely available when it comes to AI. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to add into the mix here, which is I actually write about tech and AI from a beauty, fashion, retail perspective of marketing. I'll send that to you later. But for any of your students, if you're interested in that, no one's going to say this for me, so I have to say it for myself. So I will definitely share that and just to get your feedback, because I also cover K-pop, Korea, and I spent 10 years in Asia. So I like kind of mixing in that commercial and insights perspective into it. I do want to be respectful of your time. It is 5:54 p.m. Eastern. Do you have a hard stop at 6?
No, I do have a few more minutes. I'm teaching in about an hour, but so I need to get ready for that, but I'm still flexible.
Okay, let me switch gears a little bit because we actually were not had just too much fun talking through a lot of the different topics, but I do want to open up the floor. I mean, if anyone has any questions, and I actually did, just so you know, Stefano, reach out to my streaming platform to find out what was going on, but apparently there's an issue with the LinkedIn API, which is why we can't actually stream there. So nobody should rely on one platform. That's just reminder to all of us. But if you have any questions for Dr. Puntoni, then make sure to drop them in right now. We'll try to address them. But I will get to the last part, which I feel like probably when you're on these conversations, you don't really have people ask you something like this, but a few fast questions, quick hits just to wrap up as we wait for any questions to roll in. But closet confessions, rapid fire segment, coffee, matcha, something else. What is your preferred caffeine or, thing of choice?
Yeah, coffee is an absolute must for me.
And how do you take your coffee actually?
Americano typically, actually. Yeah, so espresso, but a bit long.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna guess. I was gonna ask about espresso or not. I do use a mocha pot for the longest time, and I've been a huge fan. And it's funny, my Italian friends tell me that they use Mr. Coffee, so we're a little bit the opposite. Your favorite AI tool right now?
Right now, Claude. I did a test. I had a difficult task a few days ago. I ran it by the deep research tools at OpenAI, ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Claude did by far the best. So I'm strongly recommending Claude right now. Great writer and also great analyst.
Okay. What AI buzzword should be banned?
Agents. I'm half joking. I mean, it's a very important concept, but it's getting abused, I think, right now. Everything is an agent. Like, by the way, everything is AI. Your fridge has AI, whatever. So I think clearly there is a bit of a buzzword thing there, but yeah.
Oh my goodness. I'm just laughing because random side note, just very quick point. I went to CES as media and I actually moderated a panel on wearable tech, but because I was part of media, had the opportunity to go and check out all the booths. And there was a spice rack that was AI powered. And I was thinking to myself, what does this even mean? But it basically was saying that it will give you recipes for AI. And I just think that it's one of those things that AI for the sake of AI, not AI to actually solve a problem or to do anything. Most underrated point of view in AI.
I actually think people are saying, AI is for thinking, but people are for feeling, and that they have this domain of experience. And we are finding recent academic literature showing that AI is actually very good at empathy tasks. And so this is an area where we're going to see either in healthcare or in customer service or other domains, relationships. I think that's an interesting development where basically AI is actually much better than most people at making people feel good. And so I think that's interesting.
Oh, I want to dig into this, but we'll have to wait for another session. But what is something that more marketers and or students should experiment with when it comes to AI?
I think the deep research tools, basically this combination of a language model with a reasoning module and a strong web functionality is an incredibly strong combination. You can use it for a lot of different things.
How do you describe AI in one word? I know this is very difficult, but if you were to describe it, what would that one word be?
Amazing.
What's the misconception that people have about AI?
People anthropomorphize it. They project their own way of thinking into the AI. AI thinks, but doesn't think the way that we think. That's why at the very beginning of Begin, it's actually useful to keep in mind the architecture of AI. So you can, people do things with AI that doesn't make a lot of sense given how it is designed. So don't assume it thinks.
Okay, I'm just going to go through the the comments really quick, and then we have one question that I see right now. I think we have time for one, so I'm just going to go through very quickly. Dee, thank you for joining. People are very excited to have a mini course from Dr. Stefano. Connie was mentioning earlier about OpenAI and the human bias. I'm just running through them very quickly because, again, I know that you have to go and teach, but Hito as well. It's the nature of the masses, even though there's more important and intellectual topics and perspectives, most people will default to the funny and catchy stuff like what memes did before, which is very true. Connie agrees. Wildy, actually amazing AI fashion designer. She actually has trained her AI models to have vitiligo because that's representative of her journey because she didn't find diversity. And yes, we all want to go back to school. But I want to get to the question, which is, what are your thoughts on bridging the gap between older generations and AI?
Yeah, we see in research there's many examples where people have documented slower or lower levels of adoption among older people. This is just a trend that you see with any technology. But I think in this case, I think it is an issue. In our data, we find that experience and adoption tend to fall off a cliff a little bit after 45, 50 years old. And a lot of the business leaders who are making very big decisions around AI tend to be older than that. So I think these are technology waves. I think it's very hard to make good decisions about unless you have first-hand experience. You really need to use it to understand what it can do, the limits of it, and so on. So I do think it's important that we do make that bridge. How to do it? Yeah, just bang on and tell them, try it. It's easy. I mean, it doesn't require you to do any coding. It does the coding for you. That's the beauty of it.
And now you have voice chat GPT, so you could literally chat.
Yeah, the voice is amazing. You know how many people I'm talking to that tell me, I used to listen to radio podcast, on my commute to work. And now I just put on ChatGPT and I just talk to it and say, teach me something or tell me a funny story or whatever.
I'm going to match with you. Ray-Ban Meta AI glasses for me is the alpha because I will literally use this, go on a walk, talk to ChatGPT or take a phone call, video call, create content with it. And this literally really changes the game. And it's something so simple. We aren't even probably scratching the surface yet of what it actually can do, but it's definitely very fascinating. But let me just get to this last part. Sorry, one second. So I know I want to be respectful of your time. And Dr. Stefano Puntoni, it was literally a master class that I think a lot of us, have now decided we want to go to get an AI major, or, at least go through some of Wharton's materials that you mentioned that were available for free. But I really appreciate your time. And as I mentioned before earlier, we will be having the replay edited on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And I would love to connect with anyone who, continues to be curious, especially from a beauty and fashion perspective. And please do make sure to connect with Dr. Puntoni, especially on LinkedIn. He writes a lot and he creates a lot of interesting articles and posts on that platform, which is basically how I got connected with him. So, any final thoughts before we?
No, thank you for having me. I think, no need to be anxious about it. Just be curious and kind of enjoy it.
And I appreciate that. And we are going to film like a very short bit of a couple questions that I just want to power through very quickly. This is the Digital Runway. It's a media brand and network that really covers and focuses on decoding tech and AI when it comes to beauty, fashion, retail, as well as the intersection with culture and commerce, because AI and tech is something that we need to stay on top of. So again, thank you everyone for joining, and I will be ending the stream. Thank you.